The Terror Twins versus Judgment Day is officially on for Bash in Berlin. As we now know, we're going to get the mixed tag team match it seemed like we've been building to for months, as it will be Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley taking on Dominik Mysterio and Liv Morgan. At that show was officially announced here, coming off the heels of a very hot opening segment where you did have Rhea trading barbs with Dominik and Liv. That led to Damian Priest getting involved. Judgment Day, everyone's all over the place. Chaos as usual on this week's edition of WWE Raw. And that was, kind of contained for the Judgment Day, which is unusual to, the early part of the show. And you had so much elsewhere that we'll get to. But we always talk about it. It seems like Judgment Day is in a lot of segments on the show, but really everything was pretty much contained early on. And look, I mean, the heat continues, right? We said it, talking about how, the reaction to Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley was only going to grow from here when you really see, how they're building them against the new Judgment Day, which I'm sure you guys saw too. There was the report out there earlier in the day on Monday that they were trying to come up with names for this new Judgment Day. And one of the leaders was Street Trash, which I think I prefer the new Judgment Day versus Street Trash. But it sounds like, at least on this show, they're sticking with the new Judgment Day for now. But, this was something where you knew, because of the reaction to Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley, they were going to have to kind of be somewhat similar to Roman Reigns, right? When he comes back to avenge the Bloodline, Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley are sort of now in a position where they're having to avenge what happened to them with Judgment Day. And just kind of like in that same scenario, it is something where you have to kind of let them get theirs early on, right? Like they have to be able to get a little payback, a little revenge because of everything that was done to them. They were the ones on the opposite side of that at SummerSlam. So you have to build a little momentum now with Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley, and they did that again on this show. You had Rhea lift Dominik up, but Liv, of course, makes the save for him. So the perfect setup to get to that mixed tag team match that we're going to get in Berlin. But like I said, it was Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley standing tall for now. But at some point, right, you have to then go the other direction, which I think is going to make it interesting to see what this group right here does. And I just think every time this group of five right here is on the screen together now, it just feels like they fit together. Maybe people disagree with that, but I think we just look at how they are, right? They're all just kind of those, playing the heels that are just the backstabbing heels. Like that, that's it. Like it's the only way you can describe it. And even Finn Balor continues to bring up that word, right? Telling Damian Priest on this show that, the backstabber will be about. And we certainly expect Finn Balor to now play a role in that mixed tag team match in a couple weeks in Berlin. And so I think when you just see this group, for now, they're backtracking, right? They were the ones who plotted against Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley for all this time, but now they have to backtrack a little bit because you give all the positive momentum for Priest and Ripley. They're getting huge reactions, and they're the ones who are, feeling pretty good about themselves right now. But at some point, just like we've talked about with the Bloodline situation with Roman Reigns, is that the heels have to get control here, and it's going to be interesting to see how they do this to where, all of a sudden the power swings back in the advantage of the Judgment Day, where Finn Balor figures out something to allow that to happen. And I would think, you guys can let me know your thoughts if you want to give your way too early predictions for Berlin. But who should win that tag team match? Because is that a position where somehow Finn or someone else in the Judgment Day helps Dominik and Liv pull off the shocking upset? I don't know if that's the case because, I do think it's a scenario where, remember, we just saw, Priest lose at SummerSlam. We just saw Rhea Ripley lose at SummerSlam. Do you want to have them lose again, 4 weeks later? I think that's up for debate. But for now, I do think this is one where they're playing it out the way they should. Like you're giving, all that aggression and anger is coming out with Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley, and it's allowing them to gain the upper hand on, this Judgment Day faction that feels thrown together, right? But we know they've all been kind of working together for a while now. So there is that sort of chemistry there that they're already building together. And now we'll see what the chemistry's like for Dominik and Liv outside of eating chicken tenders and playing video games. As Dominik continues to talk about, one of the reasons why he left Rhea is because Liv allows him to do those things. So we'll see if that chemistry is there in the ring, because they do have a big challenge ahead coming up soon against the Terror Twins, Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley. But like I said, that was sort of your confined stuff here for the Judgment Day. There weren't a lot of segments on this show as there have been, in recent weeks and months, but we know why. It's because they were telling the story of what was eventually going to happen. Now we're getting the fallout, and that fallout is only going to continue. And just like I've said, it's only going to continue to make Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley even bigger stars, in my opinion, because the crowd is reacting huge to them, and they should be, because they feel bigger now, right? Even without the championship for Damian Priest, even without Rhea getting back her title, they feel bigger. And I think that is going to set them up well as we move forward in this feud with Judgment Day. But that was, as always, one of the bigger things on Raw. But you also had, Randy Orton and Gunther taking aim at each other yet again as Gunther continued to take shots at Randy Orton on this show. And Gunther talking about basically calling Orton a screw up and, bringing his grandfather and his father into this as well. And you knew that's when things were going to get a little bit heated. But it was kind of inadvertently where you had Drew McIntyre actually be the reason that Gunther took the RKO out of nowhere here as McIntyre came out to get involved. And it was Orton hitting the RKO. You could tell Gunther frustrated because what's the thing that Gunther's been talking about, right? He's been talking about the predictability of Randy Orton and even saying on this show that he thinks Orton is very predictable. And turns out we know that RKO out of nowhere is always the most unpredictable thing in WWE. And even Orton himself called himself one of the most unpredictable and violent superstars in WWE history. So you're leading towards, can Orton win that 15th World Championship? They're really building that up now and really playing up the idea that number 15 means a lot, right, for Randy Orton. And like I said, I do think that will play into him eventually going after Cody Rhodes for the WWE title. But trying to win a 15th World Championship for Orton, that's what's at stake here. And for Gunther, as we've talked about before, what's at stake is him trying to take that blemish off his record, any controversy whatsoever that was talked about after the King of the Ring. He wants to take that off of his record, but he also wants to continue to bring prestige back to this great sport, as we know. And so, not a lot here with these two other than just, kind of trading that, making it a little bit more personal now with Gunther, talking about Orton's past transgressions and, the screw-ups again, as he's labeled them, and talking about that. But Orton even admitted, hey, I have screwed up, but I've changed, and now we're kind of playing that up and Orton's need for another world title. So that was, again, kind of played off each other there. But, of course, with McIntyre coming out, that also led to CM Punk coming out, as it was Adam Pearce, saying earlier in the night, telling Drew McIntyre that, hey, I don't know what you're doing. Like, Punk's not here. He's had travel issues, all of this other stuff. And McIntyre's okay with that, just saying, hey, why is Randy Orton getting a shot at the world title? And then McIntyre saying he would be on his best behavior. Scout's honor in that he was going to take care of this whole deal with Randy Orton. So that's what prompted him to come out. And then, of course, Punk sideswipes him, and you have Punk revealing later that, hey, he lied about that. He had to tell a little white lie because he didn't, want McIntyre to know exactly what he was up to. And then you got the bigger tease, which was the strap that was used out there whenever Punk, started there. Drew takes his belt off, and Punk starts whipping him with it and all that. And then you have the backstage interview with Punk, and he mentions he thinks he's figured out a way to make everyone happy and solve this issue. Now, there's been two schools of thought on this. There's a lot of people, debating. Does this mean you're going to get just sort of your traditional strap match or something like that? Or are you going to get a dog collar match? Because we know both of them have been very popular throughout the years, and we know Punk has himself been in a very popular dog collar match in recent years with MJF and AEW. But that is kind of your old school type match, and if they're setting that up for Bad Blood, I don't know that they're setting that up for Berlin. I could be wrong on that. Maybe they're going to decide to do that there. But it seems like when you sort of look at the way they structure these cards. I feel like, doing what may feel like a big blow-off match at Bad Blood, whether that is a dog collar match, a strap match, whatever, I think that's probably the more likely scenario, but who knows? Because, what we already know on the Berlin card, you've got a pretty, loaded group so far with Cody versus Kevin Owens for the WWE title. You've got Randy Orton versus Gunther for the world title. You've got now that mixed tag team match with Rhea and Damian Priest taking on Dominik and Liv. So you're already kind of, really loading up that card with some interesting matches. Do you need this one on there, or should you save it for Bad Blood, where it is one of the most featured attractions on that card? If you're expecting these two guys to either have the strap involved, dog collar match, whatever it is, I think there's a lot of ways you can go with this. But they're clearly going to up the violence for anyone who criticized, the idea that they were just not violent enough with each other at SummerSlam, which, you can understand because they brought Seth Rollins into the mix here as a special guest referee and all that. But I think we're now guaranteeing that things are going to get a lot more physical between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, and I think you're going to see that true aggression come out in this next match they have, and we'll see if that is Bad Blood as the destination about a month and a half from now. So that was your interaction between those two. So you're seeing, like I mentioned before, everybody is connected to someone, and you can kind of see the next steps for everyone involved, whether it is the Judgment Day Terror Twin stuff, whether it is Orton and Gunther, Punk and McIntyre. And yes, I've also seen some people say, look, the Punk and McIntyre stuff was like it's cooled down a little bit. I think it's just natural coming off of, that first match and the way sort of, everything comes out of it where you have the heel having the win there, even though we know a lot of that was involving Rollins. But I think still, that means that your feud is going to continue. Like we said, if Punk would have won, there'd be no reason for it to continue. But we know we're going to lead to a much more violent match. That's what it comes down to. So they can certainly pick this thing back up. The bracelet is still something to where, they're using the props. Like we talked about, it's Roman Reigns trying to get the Ulafala back, CM Punk trying to get the bracelet back. There's a lot of props that people are trying to get back that mean something to them. But that's what wrestling is, right? We're competing for belts. So there's always some sort of thing involved like that. But elsewhere, Bronson Reed, I just feel like there are times where I want to just lead with Bronson Reed because this guy, it just continues to destroy people in his path. And it was this time around, R-Truth comically getting The Miz put into a match with Bronson Reed, which The Miz, at first, the way that R-Truth said it backstage, thought he was getting an Intercontinental Championship match against Bron Breakker, which we'll talk about Breakker and Sami Zayn here shortly. But unfortunately, the Braun that R-Truth was talking about was Bronson Reed, and Miz was not happy about that. You even had Orton come up in the back and, kind of play off of it and had a little comic relief there with him and Truth. But, yeah, Miz got destroyed here by Bronson Reed. Then you had R-Truth come in to try to, make the save. That didn't work out because then Bronson Reed took out his frustration on Truth. Tsunami after tsunami after tsunami continued to be the theme here. And then, it's the officials come out once again, and, Adam Pearce really starting to get in Bronson Reed's face. Does that lead to something at some point in the future? Because they're really playing this up now, although we've seen Pearce do this before with superstars, but this does feel a little bit different. Bronson Reed feels like an uncontrollable monster right now because of what he has done to Seth Rollins, to The Miz, to R-Truth, and we would assume that's only going to continue in terms of, his path of pure destruction here. So I'm curious if that eventually leads to something with Adam Pearce. Not saying it will be a match, but does Bronson Reed take it a little bit too far, hit one of those tsunamis on Adam Pearce? We will find out perhaps in the future. But for now, I know, and it's interesting because I've seen some people, at times have some mixed reaction to this over the past 2 weeks, but now I'm all in on this. I think this is incredible, old school, monster heel type stuff. And I am all for what they're doing right now with Bronson Reed because it automatically has heated him back up. He feels like a much bigger star than he ever has, I would say, in WWE, period. Yes, he was used better in NXT than he was, for a while there. But now, they've made him into a huge deal just in a span of a couple weeks now. And I think, we see where it goes from here. That's really what it comes down to. So I've continued to be impressed by how they're doing this because I've said before, sometimes wrestling is very simple. Sometimes you just have to have a guy who goes out and kicks someone else's ass. That's all you have to do. And Bronson Reed has taken it to another level. And he's getting over to the point to where, look, at some point, we've already seen the fans chanting one more time for him to do it against Seth Rollins. But that's, like I said, that tells you it's getting over. Even though people may be wanting to see more of it, it's just because maybe it is that visually impressive to see what Bronson Reed does time and time again as he is just squashing these guys with the tsunami. So who's next for Bronson Reed? Don't think it's Goldberg, but who's next is going to be the tagline we're going to use for Bronson Reed. perhaps, here moving forward. But elsewhere on the show, we did mention Sami Zayn and Bron Breakker. That was the main event. And as expected, it was Breakker getting the win, hitting Sami with the spear as Sami came off the top rope to get that third and decisive fall to retain the championship. I know afterwards that WWE put up a video showing sign of mutual respect between Breakker and Sami to make it clear that we're now moving on from this. Sami's had his opportunity to regain that championship, but Breakker is just a step ahead right now, which you guys know means that now we are fully back into Sami Zayn moving closer and closer towards the Bloodline saga, as now it's going to be all about him and Jey Uso chasing those tag team championships, as Jey brought it up yet again here in a backstage segment. So we know we're getting to that, and you would think that's coming very soon because, we know everything that needs to be in motion to somehow draw those guys back into the Bloodline stuff before we get to that true build to like Survivor Series and the War Games match in November. But we got a couple months, and I think it's going to all be about now Jey and Sami chasing those tag team championships to try to, again, become the champions on the Raw brand. Meanwhile, you have the Bloodlines, the tag team champions on SmackDown, unless they were to lose the titles to either the Street Profits or DIY. I highly doubt it. But that's where we're headed towards now with Sami Zayn. He moves into the team with Jey Uso. And meanwhile, who's the next challenger for Bron Breakker? I think Ilya Dragunov would be an interesting option based on the match that they had and Breakker taking him out and sort of having, sort of that no contest, sort of the TKO type ending, I guess, pun intended, with Braun and Dragunov there. What was that, several weeks ago or whatever. So I think, certainly that's an option, and I would love to continue to see those two fight each other because they've been fantastic, I think, in the ring together. But there's a lot of options for Bron Breakker now, and I think you're just seeing him continue to develop more and more and more in the ring, like he's just having better matches. And we talked about kind of how short that match was with Sami at SummerSlam, but I thought this was once again showcasing what Breakker can do in a match like this. 2 out of 3 falls, main event setting, and he held his own, right? He looks like a star, and they're building him, like even McAfee going off the air. It's like this is the Bron Breakker era, and continue to push stuff like that. So, you've got these sort of 2 badass champions now when you look at Gunther, when you look at Breakker. And yeah, like that's a match too at some point in the future. May not be anytime soon, maybe a year from now or whatever, but that's another one that certainly excites people. People were even thinking, could we get that at WrestleMania 40, right? When some thought Breakker may be the one to challenge Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship. So Bron Breakker continues, as the Intercontinental Champion. Sami's going to move on to the tag team title picture. And so we know that is where they're headed. As usual, we'll go rapid fire, kind of with some other quick notes on everything that happened on Raw. You'd have Mark Henry and his son Jacob make an appearance here. So if anyone wanted to see the world's strongest man, he made an appearance in the crowd. So perhaps Mark Henry, which they just did the A&E biography thing on him. So perhaps Mark Henry gets a little bit more involved at some point, doing some stuff in WWE here again. You also had the New Day stuff continue with clearly. They are teasing this Xavier Woods turn on Kofi Kingston. And, you kind of had the back and forth here where, Kofi continues to kind of push Odyssey Jones into this role in the New Day, and you continue to see the hesitation from Xavier Woods, which we know they can play into that, right? Because it can all be about Big E. And even Karrion Kross brings it up here that, some people may think that Kofi Kingston's trying to replace Big E with Odyssey Jones when Karrion Kross says he's actually trying to replace Xavier Woods. And so he continues to plant those things in Xavier's mind. I mean, I've even seen people say, hey, look, even at Xavier Woods maybe dressing a little bit more like Final Testament here and all this other stuff. And for me, like Xavier Woods being in Final Testament, it just feels like one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. It just feels odd. I don't know if that's going to happen, but having the break between Xavier and Kofi, I mean, they are pointing you in that direction. And perhaps that's what they do to give these guys something fresh to work with, because the New Day's been around for a while now. As we know, I still think they're stronger together, but maybe this is kind of, one of those things where, hey, they're going to give this a try, see what happens, and they're pushing you more and more towards that. And so we'll see if that's what we're going to get with perhaps a breakup with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. But they're definitely planning Odyssey Jones in the middle of this, so we'll see what we get out of that. Speaking of breakups, Maxine Dupree and Ivy Nile were good friends until Ivy Nile just destroyed her in that match involving Alpha Academy and American Made. Of course, it was American Made to get the win. I like the pre-match promo from Chad Gable in Paris, France, at the Olympics, saying he's scouting new talent and all this other stuff. But again, the heel's getting the win, not a surprise here. And they kind of set it up earlier that Nia was going to attack Maxine, telling her, you probably shouldn't be ringside. And of course, she decides to do it. And so Ivy Nile takes her out. So that was certainly there. We're getting the match now between Sheamus and Pete Dunne. They did the interviews where you had Dunne sitting in the empty arena with Jackie Redmond, and Jackie talks to Sheamus, and they're building that up. Ludwig Kaiser, comes in, and so Dunne, ends up attacking Sheamus after that. So we're getting the match next week with Sheamus and Pete Dunne. Been working towards that one for several weeks now. And you also had the introduction of the Pure Fusion Collective, which is quite a name, in my opinion. That's one of those names where it's like, I just have no idea maybe where that came from. I can't say it's maybe my most favorite name I've ever seen for a faction in WWE, but the Pure Fusion Collective of Sonya Deville, Shayna Baszler, and Zoey Stark, they tried to get, the earning the spot as the number one contenders for the tag team championships, but you had the champs interfere after the, Zoey Stark accidentally kicked Alba Fire on the outside. So throw out the match, and now we're getting the triple threat match for the WWE Women's Tag Team titles next week, as it will be Io Sky and Kairi Sane versus Baszler and Stark versus Alba Fire and Isla Dawn for the titles, which to me means they're getting that match out of the way so they can eventually get the titles back on Jade and Bianca, but it's just a matter of when is that going to happen. By the way, too, I'm sure you guys saw, injury note, I think Dakota Kai is set to be out 8 to 10 weeks, a meniscus injury, so best wishes to her. Not ideal, because I know she's had, you guys know, she's had injuries in recent years, and so hoping for a quick recovery for Dakota Kai there to get Damage Control fully back intact. But that was this week's edition of Raw. You sort of had another one of the promos too with Bo Dallas playing up the stuff, talking about the meaning behind last week's debut for the Wyatt Six and everything. But that was really all you got for the Wyatt Six on this show, which I think is fine. I've said that before. I don't think they have to be on every single show every single week. I think sometimes it's okay to let things breathe a little bit and then get to the next thing, right? And so you get the impactful win for them in the main event last week, and now we see where they go from here. But that was this week's Raw. I'm sure there's something I forgot because it's the 3-hour Raw and there's always a lot going on. But as I'm skimming through my notes here, I think that was certainly the biggest points, and a lot of stuff still connecting together storyline-wise, and a lot more to come on the road to Bash in Berlin and the road to Bad Blood. So you guys let me know what you thought about this week's edition of WWE Raw. What'd you like? What didn't you like? Where do you think some of these big storylines are headed? Give me your thoughts and predictions in the comments. As always, I appreciate you guys' feedback. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.